Just going to introduce myself very quickly, but definitely the real opportunity for today is to hear from all of our panelists. But my name is Wilnelia Rivera, or Wilnelia Rivera. I'm the president at Rivera Consulting. We are a management consulting and urban planning firm that is locally based here in Massachusetts. We're a team of about 6 staffers, and we work with municipalities, philanthropy, and advocacy organizations focused on both environmental justice, reproductive justice, as well as multimodal planning. Sounds like a mix, but that's my world. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to folks about what does civic engagement look like, and what does community organizing look like, and what's the value. And when I think about the last 2 decades of my own organizing work, I think about the ways in which they're interconnected. I always say that the arc that carries it all through is the value of making the impossible possible. But most importantly, understanding that the most important thing that you can do is never let go of a good idea. And on top of that, making sure that you understand that no good deed is ever done by yourself. And what this work really takes is the understanding that we gotta figure out what are the fractals and connection points that bring us together, right? But also understanding what our deal breakers might be so that we can really understand how we navigate the needle to create more collective change. So I'm excited today to be able to have this conversation with all our folks today. But I also wanted to share some context setting for our conversation, right? This is a Pride in the Workplace conversation. And it's crazy to think about, I was asked before I came to the panel today, they're getting me ready and mic'd up. They're like, oh, are you a member? And I said, well, actually, no, I'm just very gay and I created my own gay company. Because I realized that working in state government and other forms of justice and movements, it was great, but I couldn't, really build a more queer team and be more queer me, right? So share that just as a context setting, but I think it's important to remember that for folks that are here, employee resource groups are extremely important as a space for civic engagement and political activities to happen in the workplace, right? And I think it's also important to take to mind that we're also at a time where people see themselves more as consumers and less as citizens, right? And that's also, I think, part of how civic engagement has been redefined in our not just in our country, but most importantly here at home. And I think the other thing that I also want to make sure that I kind of bring into the space that we'll be talking a lot about is all the different forms of civic engagement that exist, right? And most importantly, that we can't live a life that is too political, because at the end of the day, our identities are what they are, right? And I can check them at the door if you ask me to, but the reality is that I'm an interconnected human. And I think what's important and exciting about what we get to hear today is how different people are approaching this, whether they're in the corporate, whether they're nonprofits, right? Or whether they're starting civic organizations that aren't fiscally incorporated, right? So I'm gonna give an opportunity for all of our participants to introduce themselves. I'd love for all of you to introduce your name, your pronouns, and your organization. And then answer the following question. Nancy knows me, so she has notes already ready to go. When you think of your service, why do you do what you do? Obviously, introduce your organization and who you work for. That's important, right? Who you're representing today. But I also would love to share with you an opening, question. When you think of your service, why do you do what you do?
Alex. Hi everyone, my name is Sam Montano, or Sam Montano. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the executive director of the Trans Emergency Fund. Why do I do what I do? I think partially it's how I grew up and what I experienced. So I grew up low income. I grew up with a family that struggled with substance use disorder, with a divorced parents. I had to move a lot because we were low income, and supported my family in different periods of my life, and also helped raise my sister. And also how I identify. I think a lot of why I do what I do is partially based in my political awakening, which was in 2008. I turned 18. It was the first time I got to vote. I voted for Barack Obama. I'm originally from California. We had a big deferred action for childhood arrivals, advocacy in college. We had what happened at Fruitvale, the Oscar Grant. We had the Prop 8, which outlawed gay marriage. And so all of that was happening as I was figuring myself out, and that's what motivated me to do this work and to get involved. And I'm a softie too, I think. I just have a lot of feelings. So I care about those things.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jack Imbergamo. My pronouns are he, him. I am co-founder, along with my co-founder over here, of the Queer Neighborhood Council. And I do what I do as a means of survival. It's not a choice for me. I'm trans. I'm visibly trans. I'm out in the world. I have children, and it's not safe for me. It's not safe for my kids. I came out 2 years ago next month, and I live just down the street in the North End. I've been there since I was 19, since I was a college student, and the neighborhood knew me, and I was naive in thinking, you know, these people know I'm human. They know I'm a great parent and a kind person, and this will make a difference. And unfortunately, it didn't, and it was not received well at all. There was a lot of negative backlash, and it wasn't just for myself. It was for my family and for my children. Experiencing transphobia in schools and in sports and inside the community. And so Matthew and I were like, someone should do something about this. So that's why I do what I do.
Thank you.
I'm Matthew Brody. I'm the other co-founder, and I guess running with this joke, Rude Brown. Everyone always mispronounces my name. It's spelled very strangely.
Brody.
Yeah, it's not the way you'd expect Brody to be spelled. But I met Jack about a year and a half ago, right before we started TQNC, and I think very similar to Sam's experience, kind of grew up with some sensibility of a need to be engaged, and I think for a long time got very comfortable that things seemed sort of okay in the world, and the last several years started looking around and realizing, particularly the attacks on the transgender community, felt like I needed to do something, and I felt very unsure how to do anything at the national level. It felt like this completely unapproachable landscape that there was sort of no entry to, and I met Jack, and I heard sort of bigger version of the story that Jack just shared. And as Jack said, it sort of felt like, someone should do something about this stuff at a local level, the neighborhood level that's happening. And Jack has always said that it was me. I always said it was Jack, but like one of us was like, we could be the ones who do that. And we just sort of started. And so I think we just do it out of the necessity. It was very much for me felt like I finally had a way to contribute and do something once I met Jack, and then I think since then we've met, I think literally at this point thousands of people who have been involved in the work that we've done, and they just keep kind of propelling it forward for some reason.
You want to try this mic or that mic? Or?
Can you hear me? How about now?
Oh, all right, one mic.
We can manage. Hi, I'm Nancy Stager. I'm the president and CEO of Eastern Bank Foundation. Who's heard of Eastern Bank? All right, I love this crowd. If you haven't heard of us, don't worry, you can always come and open your account, it's okay. I've been at Eastern 29 years, and in 2010 we acquired Wainwright Bank. And everybody thinks that's when Eastern got a conscience, but that's not true. Those of you on the North Shore, Hope's not here, but know that we were involved long before that. And because it's the right thing to do, and because somebody needs to do it, I became one of the lead advocates, the mouthpiece for Eastern, internally, to help our employees, but also externally to do the right thing. And worked with Karen, there she is. Worked with Karen on the Yes on 3 campaign, came to the Hill and advocated years ago to protect the rights of people who are transgender, and met Mason, where's Mason? There's Mason, at MTPC. And John and I were the two speakers at the Spirit Networking event for, I don't know, 10 years, 12 years, something, it's crazy number. The LGBT community needs allies. Can't do it alone. In fact, none of us can do it alone. And so I am firmly in the ally category, and will always be.
Thank you. Thank you all. I always like starting with that question, whether it's a panel, whether I'm facilitating certain meetings. I just find different ways of asking it. To me, the most powerful part of civic engagement and organizing is the stories that we often don't like to say about ourselves, right? Because it gives us an opportunity to both understand the connection points that we have towards each other, right? But also an opportunity for us to reflect on our own lived experiences, what part we want to share with ourselves today. This first question is actually going to be for Jack and Matthew. You've shared a little bit about sort of the foundations of the Queer Neighborhood Council, but I'm sure it's not all, right? So I want to hear more about sort of not just you shared more a little bit about sort of your personal stories, but I'd love to hear more of what's transpired over the last 2 years and what are some of the key lessons, right, that journey has taught you that you want to share with others in the room today.
Actually, Sam just asked me tonight how I thought it was going. We're coming up on 1.5 years next month. And we went into this with no expectations. We really just threw ourselves into it. Like, someone has to do this. We're just gonna do this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like, whoever shows up is who's meant to show up. And we're gonna look at quality and not quantity. And we really had to get over this, like, the egoic mind of like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. What if I host this event and no one shows up? Or what if I make a mistake and it goes terrible? We had to like keep coming back to ourselves, keep reminding ourselves, why are we doing this? Like, it's not for us, it's for all of you, it's for all of us. And I think the biggest thing for me, I mean, the Queer Neighborhood Council has definitely saved my life. Coming out of a heteronormative marriage and not having any queer community whatsoever, I couldn't do it alone. And it's been really beautiful to see like each and every event that we have, whether it's like 5 people or 50 people, the different people that show up, like that are there to be engaged, that are present and conscious and like want to make those connections. And we're so busy like on our phones and just like lost in our minds, that just being like face to face and like looking someone in the eye and saying, hi, how are you? How are you doing? That is so much of the work that we do, not the time that we're sitting like talking about policy change, even though that's also important. But we're human, and we need, I need this council just as much as everyone else that's in it.
I guess a couple of things I'll add. So I think one of the big insights early on was that Jack and I spent probably close to a month trying to figure out like what the Queer Neighborhood Council would be, and we knew the problem we were trying to sort of solve, which was very much driven by experiences that Jack talked about and experiences that I had had in civic and community spaces, not feeling safe as a member of the queer community. And I think the like big breakthrough moment, which I'm pretty sure happened over a year, was that we could just ask people. And I think we like went through all this process where we were like, should it be this, should it be this, like, what should we do, whatever. And it like now in retrospect seems really obvious, and probably like, everyone in the room is like, of course, but it took us a while to sort of realize we should just go ask. So we spent the first like 9 months just going to different neighborhoods of Boston, hosting events where we would talk to people about, what makes community spaces safe and unsafe for you, what do you want this to be, what do you want to advocate around. And that's really what led to the 4 pillars of the Queer Neighborhood Council, was just straight community feedback. So we have the Housing and Policy Advocacy Group because we kept getting feedback that people wanted to advocate, particularly around housing. We have policy roundtables where we sit down with elected officials and policy experts because we heard people wanted to have the direct connection and be able to have their voices heard directly. We have community arts events because we kept hearing there weren't enough queer spaces for artists to perform or to sell crafts. And then we have socials because we heard people wanted to just get together, as Jack was saying, and just be in the room together regardless of what the activity was. So I think that was the big thing. I think the other thing I just wanted to share from what you said is Jack and I debated a lot early on amongst ourselves and with some of the early members about how allies fit in. And there were some folks who were like, you know, maybe it should be a queer only space. Is it really going to be safe if we invite allies, or is it going to end up being sort of ally dominated? And I think Jack was really the one who had the best insight on this, that as you said, we just can't do it without allies. There is not enough collective resource, I guess, you know, in terms of burnout even amongst the community, to not lean on the people who have, you know, some capacity that we may not all have day to day. So I think those have been kind of the big insights, just being in the room together, the importance of allies, and then most of all just asking people.
Thank you. Anything else? I always like to ask this in case. No,
stats.
we'll come back. But I want to actually, for this next question, it's for Nancy. I want to talk a little bit more about CSR and the connections with civic engagement. You know, we often talk a lot about how there's sort of no-nos in the workplace, right? Especially when it comes to particularly explicit political discussions or perhaps endorsements of partisan candidates, right? But obviously, a lot of the civic engagement activities are also mapped onto how companies, you know, work and how their culture is. Whether that's, you know, individual charitable giving programs or even letting employees become poll workers, right? I'm curious to hear from your experience at Eastern. What have you seen in your company or other companies that are successfully leaning into encouraging community and employee engagement?
Well, I think every company should be leaning into this, and unfortunately, in the last 5 years or so, we're starting to see people pulling back from that. Where's Brian? Brian stole my line earlier today, but happy to share. Employees need to agitate in positive ways that help the organization to stay the course. Because it's very easy for, particularly public companies, to use the excuse of being public and we don't want to lose customers and all, which is, sorry, bullshit. And the line I want on the but it is, right? You know, we know that's not true, and we know we were so much further, it felt like, you were saying, we were so much further ahead, but we weren't. And that's been the hard lesson in the last few years, is that we really weren't as far as we thought. But we need to dust ourselves off and move forward, and I mean that as individuals, but I also mean that as companies. And our employees in any organization are looking for those organizations to be authentic. Do what you say what you do. It's very simple. And when companies fall back from that, and there's plenty of examples, then their customers and their employees realize that it's just pablum, right? It's just something to have said or something to put in the window or you know, not meaningful to them. And it's the employees that can, in positive ways, help leadership realize that this matters. This matters to us as employees, it matters to our customer base, and so on. And when we do that, then we stay the course. And we need people inside the company to acknowledge that it matters, and that they have to be at all levels of the organization, not just at the senior levels. And when we do that, then we stay the course, and we can support, and we can lean in times like this instead of leaning back. And it is honestly very painful to me, having been doing this for 20 years, to be, or more, to see so many companies saying, well, let's study that. It's like, we don't need any more damn studies. Everything's been studied. We know what we need to do. We need to treat people with dignity. We need to let them be who they are, period. It's very simple. And by doing that, the company benefits because everybody can make the contributions they were intended to make, because they're not encumbered by having to be something else to check their identity at the door. It's such a simple concept, and it is straightforward, but you gotta stay to it. And I think the way to help companies to see that is through our ERGs, through our leadership, and just by talking to people within the organization about how important it is to you. And that isn't gonna be every conversation, unfortunately. But if we're having those conversations, we have a better chance at it. If we don't have those conversations, it's really hard, and the backslide is gonna happen. So we're in our Massachusetts bubble now. Let's keep the bubble going. And let's make sure that it's not just a bubble, that we're really being genuine in what we're doing. And that will make a safe space for people, and people can be themselves. We can all benefit by that.
Thank you, Nancy. I wanna build off of the, part of the theme that you're sharing in terms of the pushback against, DEI, or belonging and justice for that matter. But looking at it more from sort of the nonprofit perspective. So Sam, I'm teeing you up. Obviously we're seeing, sort of let's say, for lack of better words, a permission to avoid these conversations and avoid this kind of culture building. So I'm curious, as a nonprofit leader and community organizer, how are you approaching this avoidance? And are you finding that there are ways that are effective at re-engaging some of these folks? Or are you doing something different altogether, right? But just curious on how you're navigating that reality at this juncture.
So I'm really direct. I'm a really direct communicator, and so I have these conversations regularly, and you can see people like kind of pale when you say direct things to them, and they're like, oh, that was unexpected. But I think that this is an essential part of our organizational health across the board. We should be talking to each other. You should be able to navigate multiple conversations. You should be able to talk to your coworker and disagree, and they should be able to take your disagreement and still disagree with you and be able to work with you. And I think that's why we've created such a polarized world that we're navigating and living in, because no one feels comfortable disagreeing anymore. No one feels comfortable navigating and living in that space and understanding that this person is more than just this one thought, this person is more than just this one opinion. And that's not true across the board, right? Like there are some harmful things that people think and people believe, and those are very different things. And then I think that's where, as leaders, we need to step in and say, like, this is not tolerated in this organization. That what you're saying is directly harmful to the health of our organization, but that is a different set of standards. And I think just being able to navigate multiple viewpoints and multiple avenues and multiple ways to approach something. I think this is something we're also seeing coming out of our youth. We're learning that youth are not performing well in reading and writing. What do you get when you read? You get to learn a whole set of skills. You learn about a character, you watch them take a journey, you watch them mess up in their journey, you watch maybe an unreliable narrator, and you learn to see those things. Same thing with writing. If you're able to have that skill, you can create a more, I think, holistic perspective, and I think in losing that educationally and losing that space and not investing in these more traditionally considered creative endeavors, we're losing the ability to then see that transfer to the workplace. And I think that's why it's been so hard for us to navigate and to move forward. We're seeing it, I told you not to say it. I'm also a state rep in my same life, I guess.
The same thing. It's like this part over here.
Yeah. And I think one of the hardest things I have to navigate with folks and constituents is when I say we're one district, one vote, and not everyone agrees with us. And so our work is to make sure that we take the time and invest and bring people along for the journey. And I think that's kind of what everyone else has said. You gotta be willing to play the long game. And I think that's the ultimate takeaway, is that if you sit and engage with someone and have a conversation with them and totally disagree, write them off, try to cancel them, try to get them removed from the organization, you're totally disinvesting in someone. And maybe it's not your direct responsibility to invest in that person, but you can encourage your employees, you can't encourage your workplace, you can't encourage mentorship, so that person does take a journey, and maybe they never get to where you want them to be, but they know that you took the time, or they know that someone took the time to provide them with multiple viewpoints. And if they can make the space to hold those multiple viewpoints, I think we're a much stronger base and people. I don't know.
No, really appreciate the thoughtfulness there, especially.
I don't know what I said.
Well, I do. I'm one of us are paying attention at least. So, but the reason I share that is that at the beginning I talked about making the impossible possible, but you also refer to the long arc, and that's really what I mean. The reason it feels impossible is that you don't see it through long enough to see when it became possible, right?
We're both organizers.
Right? But more importantly, it's also the holding of that individual, right? And I think that sometimes in the larger policy debates or in the larger political debates, we have forgotten the art of reciprocity, right? That we're living in an actual community with each other. So just appreciate everything that the panelists have shared so far, and actually have a question. Just want to build off of your comments that anyone can take. We're talking a lot about wanting companies to take risks, right? It's easier in some ways, or not easier, but I think we have more of a kindred crowd here where we're talking about our individual and our organizing stories for how we're bringing people together in this particular context, right? But I think the reality is that for some of us that are doing our work here, we're actually navigating this in real time, right? So what I'd love to be able to hear from anyone on the panel is what would you say to organizations or companies, and it could be in your case people, right? That are saying that this is too risky, right? Or I don't really have time for this right now, right? What would you say again to those people, those organizations, or those companies? And again, anyone that wants to go, I'd love to hear from everyone on the panel about this. You guys do that thing where you look at each other. We're looking at my
Also
first.
try to remember which is the working mic.
This is the one working
Okay.
night we have. And it was closest to me.
You see, it's already community building. It's part of the community building exercise.
What I always do is point out the risks of not doing it. Because the risk of not letting people be who they are and to be in community with other people on the team and learning from each other, that's a far greater risk. And, I think people, when the light bulb goes off, you can bring people further down the journey. You're right, Sam, you can't always bring them all the way to where you'd like them to be. But if they are open to it and you acknowledge where they are and where you are, you can get people to move some. And if we're all doing it, then we're gonna get them further down the line. And, that's how we were able to do what we did with the ballot question on the SM3. It was to get people to know what it's like to be trans, figure out that they know someone who's trans, and acknowledge that human dignity is human dignity. I wanted to add to Sam's point earlier that you never know when you're working on this in the long haul. You never know who you're affecting. And 10 years after the ballot, yes, I'm free, my nephew came out as trans, and he came to me and said, I was so proud of you when you did that. I had no idea, but it didn't matter.
He was paying attention to
He was paying attention, and it helped him. And to be able to do that for people that you don't know. You just don't know who you're gonna touch. And so it's worth it. It's worth doing it. It's worth the persistence. It's worth the long-term arc.
I think what you're saying is kind of my thinking too, and I guess I feel like the corporate answer is competitive advantage and employee retention, and I do want to sort of acknowledge that
Notice I didn't say
you didn't say that.
That's another panel down the hall.
And I feel like, first of all, I want to sort of acknowledge, particularly for this audience, that obviously, we should recognize that I think we're talking about workplace environments that, skew toward more wealthier, well-resourced workers, and we're not necessarily talking about the entirety of the queer community. In fact, we're not necessarily talking about the portion of the queer community that's sort of most at risk. And I think particularly we should remember that, in Massachusetts, queer people experience poverty at about a 50% elevations, 150% likelihood of the cisgender population. So with that context of in a corporate environment, I guess, we're thinking about that. I think, I think about the comment you made about the Massachusetts bubble that, we sometimes take for granted that Massachusetts is this very progressive place. And I think lots of folks, particularly the more marginalized portion of the community, recognize that that's not reality for a lot of people. And I think even, we know like the stats are just crisis level all the time, right? So, I mean, in Massachusetts, right, this like safe bubble place, this place that everyone else in the country maybe wants to come to be safe, adults experience anxiety and depression in the queer community at twice the rate of their cishet counterparts. 13 to 18-year-old youth in Massachusetts who identify as LGBTQ+, consider suicide. 41% of them, 11+% of them have tried to commit suicide. These are kids, 13 to 18-year-olds, right? It's not even adults, right? So I think when we're talking about this, for me, it's like, it can sound hyperbolic, but it's like literally the reason to do it is so you don't kill your employees and their kids. Like at the end of the day, it's the mental health of the people who are working for you. It touches everyone, right? If it's not them, it's their kid, it's their nephew, their niece. Like everyone's got someone in their orbit who is experiencing this lived reality, and if you as an employer cannot find the purpose to care enough about that, to create an environment where those people are in some way safer through your actions, then it's like, what are you even doing? Right? What is the point of having a company at that point?
I wanted to share a story. I had mentioned that I live in the North End and had come out 2 years ago. At that time, I also took a job working for Boston City Councilor Gabriela Coletta Zapata as her North End liaison. So the move from the community in the North End to just literal streets over into City Hall was drastic change for me, because I was coming from a neighborhood where people were avoiding looking me in the eye, were crossing the street to not say hi to me, they were dead naming me, and to come into City Hall, it felt so welcoming, honestly, just for people to say my name, and to see that there was a gender-neutral bathroom on my floor. And even then, when I was doing my onboarding, I had not legally changed my name yet, and the City of Boston required that they go by whatever is on your birth certificate. So we use Gmail, that's how I work. And the email address I was given was my dead name, and I have to tell you, like, the gut-wrenching feeling that it felt just, honestly, having that created, and now it's out there forever. And I didn't know what to do at the time, and I went to my boss and explained what was going on, and I consider her an ally, but this is something that she would have had no idea would have affected me. And I'm honestly so happy to share this like success story, that she decided to make an amendment of the 2020 Gender and Inclusivity Ordinance that Mayor Michelle Wu had passed when she was on the council. And the amendment was called Jack's Law. It's like, how affirming is that? Forever in the books, my name, like ridiculous. And I was just in awe, like, oh my God, this is so crazy. And I'm thinking how, like, this is really great for me that now I can have an email with my actual name, and then to stop and think like, wow, okay, so what about all the other City of Boston employees that don't have this opportunity, that haven't had this opportunity? So the ordinance made it, the amendment made it that any City of Boston employee, including BPS workers, can go by their chosen name. And we are living in a bubble, and in a sense, that we still have so much work to do. And it's like so exciting that I haven't even seen the ripple effects of it yet, but just to know that, again, it's not about me, but the next person that comes on doesn't have to experience that type of trauma.
No, Jax, it's a very powerful story, and what I love about hearing this is that often in the work I get to do as a bridge, I don't get to hear the stories. And for the last 2 years, not this year, but in 2023 and 2022, I worked as a coach and program development consultant with the Equity and Inclusion Office to help the city of Boston, to help them create a strategic plan and prioritize the kinds of policies that we actually think that they could get done. And one of them was this. So to hear that is really, and I share that because that's really the power of organizing. And when we talk about the Massachusetts bubble, it's deconstructed. It's an outside-inside process. So some people might want to call it a game, but really it's people's lives. And what we are, it's an ecosystem. And because of the way the state works, it's resource-rich and coordination-poor. However, in order to create enough connective tissue amongst it, you've got to be relational. You have to do the organizing, whether it's in your workplace, whether it's in your place of worship, whether it's in the park you like to go to go with your kids, right? Or whether it's the local supermarket that you don't want to see coming into your neighborhood, right? Those are the kinds of things that make us, right? So I don't want to derail from this, but I just wanted to just share that. Because the bubble isn't a bubble, it's work. And everybody in this room, whether it's your lived life or your professional life, is spending time every single way in doing that. And what I'd love to just ask, again, you know, for everyone on the panel, I'm doing everyone on the panel now, guys. It's that portion of the panel. I'd love to be able to just hear from all of your collective experiences. Are there other opportunities of like collective action, whether it's been at your company, Nancy, you know, the last last 4 years, right? Let's think about the last 4 years. Which ways that your employees have really shown up and come together to say, this is something that matters to me, right? Or even in your own neighborhood of JP, right? You know, what's something that's transpired that people perhaps in this room don't know, right? Because I think a lot of times the stories of collective action, you know, we say it in our own little ways and we don't really experience them, right? So just curious to just open up the microphone here. If there are other, again, collective action stories, whether it's from companies, the grassroots, nonprofits, the neighborhood, that you'd love to be able to share with others today. I'm just looking at you, Sam.
I was thinking. I think it's hard to have volunteers, right? We all know that like having volunteers is incredible. You have to create a whole workload for them. If you're like a 3-person LGBTQ nonprofit like me, like oh my, like the thought of having 20 volunteers is like, I'm like, please no. I'd rather suffer under 40 hours of work than navigate this. But it's also the greatest opportunity that we have, I think, to share our work in a really powerful way, and building on like the organizing networks. We're all little spokes in the wheel, right? So like I share with you what Trans Emergency Fund does, and then you go out and share with other people, and maybe it gets to one person further down the line and they apply for a resource, and I ask, how did you learn about this? And they tell me, oh, a friend, this, and because Massachusetts is so small, you're probably all interconnected in some way. And so it's, I think this isn't related to Trans Emergency Fund, but I was at Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation, because I come from affordable housing development originally. And it was during the first election, the first Trump administration, and it was when we were afraid of losing members of our community who were on DACA. And everyone was like, what do we do? And impacting federal policy is messy and highly unlikely, usually. And so we came together and held a fundraiser, and we were able to pay for 15 people in the community who we knew DACA renewal fees, because it's like several $100s. We were able to do that in 2 days. And several of those people worked at local businesses. Several of those people worked in local nonprofits. Some of them were at healthcare facilities. And a lot of those people still live in Jamaica Plain, because when you're in JP, why would you ever want to leave and go anywhere else? And And so we still see all those people in the community, and we all still shop in the same stores, and we all still run into each other, getting on the T or walking our dogs or out with our kids. And I think it's been one of the most helpful things to continue to build community and to continue to impact our workforce. You know, people are at our jobs 40 plus hours. If you're a nonprofit, more than 40 hours probably a week, right? They're with you a long time. They're with you all day, every day. And they want to feel good about what they do. Like, they want to feel good about themselves. They want to come home and they don't want to, like, whine to their partner or to their kid, like, oh, I hate this job. Like, nobody wants that, right? And that's good for retention. And the other thing in Massachusetts that we need to be realistic about is that we're losing population. We need people to come here. We need people to want to be here. And so part of that is saying, like, the culture in Massachusetts, the culture in our corporations is that we care about people and that we want to invest people, because we're expensive, we're cold, we don't have seasonal.
The California roots come out.
Yeah. Where's my, like, strawberries on the side of the road? Like, I can't pick my own strawberries, it's ridiculous. And so we have to appeal to people in other ways, and I think that the way we have appealed to people is through our liberalism, our progressivism, our accepting the person. And I think across the board, and that's something that the governor talks about as well when she's appealing for folks to come here, is come to Massachusetts because we respect you as a person and you will thrive. And it's hard when we haven't built enough housing, when we haven't built enough public infrastructure to do it. And part of that, I think, is the role that companies have in making that happen, and being willing and not fighting every tax increase, and being willing to put in that extra effort, and being willing to invest in private and public partnerships, and being willing to take care of the public streets, because we don't exist.
We'll
without
ride
each
on
other.
them.
Yeah, we don't. We're it's not independent, right? And I lost the thread of where I was going with this, but I think it's just to remember that, like, you don't just have to send us volunteers once a year for these things. You can also invest in the community in other ways and know that it will come back to you with employee retention and with goodwill and with, you know, I want to work for that company because, like, I would love to work for Eastern Bank because I know they're a good company. Right? And I wouldn't be ashamed to say, like, oh yeah, I work for Eastern Bank. Like, I would be proud to say that. And I think those are things that we need to take into consideration too when we're asking for ways to impact the community. It's not just like volunteer service, it's also investing in different ways of life. So, and that's something I think that the bank does well.
I have spent my life like breaking myself down into tiny bite-sized pieces that are easily digestible for people, and it depends on what room I'm in, it depends on who the people in the room are. And so my journey in this transhood is not sacrificing myself and showing up as my whole self in every room that I go into. It's extremely uncomfortable. I don't want to be up here. I don't want to be talking right now. Please don't look at me.
You're like 45 minutes in, Jack. So.
No, and it hasn't gone away yet. Our first, I just told Brian this earlier tonight, the first event that we had, I couldn't speak. I told Matthew, I'm sorry, you have to take this. All I want to say is my name is Jack and my pronouns are he, him, and I'm trans, and I couldn't say that, so I refused to speak. And I'm thinking about the council, and when we first started, we were like, yeah, let's do this. It was just going to be, it's the neighborhood council, it's just going to be the north end and downtown, because that's where Matthew and I live. And the first meeting that we had over a dozen different neighborhoods represented there and people outside of Boston. And we were like, that's great, you know, everyone's welcome. And every event that we had, more and more people showed up. That honestly, I lost count. And we have people not only from all over the Commonwealth, but from other states too that are coming here, you know, seeking refuge, even other countries seeking asylum, and just Googling queer, you know, Boston groups. And so to see that the council started with just Matthew and I, and unfortunately, in some ways, for my shyness, has gotten a lot bigger. But that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess I just wanted to maybe underline something for each of you. So I think, first of all, the time that we've been doing this together, I've just been really proud of Jack and the evolution of you becoming marginally less horrified by being in front of the next meeting. And it's funny because actually I said something similar at another panel that I was on in January. That I speak in public a lot now, and I think people probably presume that I enjoy it or I'm comfortable with it. Actually, it's awful every time, but you just sort of force yourself to do it. So I think one thing I want to share with that, and I think Jack has done amazingly with, is just for anyone who ever feels like you don't want to be the person in front of people, just do it. It's awful. It's still awful. It doesn't get better. I'm sorry. I'm not going to lie to you, but I think you can sort of force yourself over the hump and get better at that. The other thing I just want to underline is that if people cannot afford to live in Massachusetts and in Boston, the bubble doesn't matter. And if they don't have community, the bubble doesn't matter. If they can't get around via transportation, the bubble doesn't matter, right?
There's an entry fee.
Yeah.
It's very expensive.
And I think to Sam's point, we're losing people, and the people we're losing are the ones that we would hope to protect. The people who can afford to stay here right now, who have the resources, who are still able to afford what Boston has become, are not necessarily the people that are most at risk. So if we really care as a group, right, if people in this room care, if the companies that you work for care about having people coming and living and wanting to stay, you do at the end of the day. You've got to, as a company, contribute enough that the environment that you exist in is able to host anyone, right?
Yeah, you really hope that companies and organizations realize that soon enough, because otherwise we're really going to have a problem. And the piece that I wanted to add is that none of us are only one thing. And so when we're working on things around, at Eastern, when we work on things around housing, around workforce development, around early childhood development, or advancing equity for small businesses, all of those things cut your LGBT people in all of those areas. And so we look at things on that intersectionality basis, that we want people to be all of who they are, which is not just one monolithic thing. And when we recognize that, we can connect with people in different ways. And that helps people to learn, and helps people to be who they are. And as someone who used to be very shy and hated doing public speaking, it does get a little better when you do it for a really long time. But if you have something important to say, people will listen, and that's the real key.
Let's see. So we're getting to the end of our time together, but I do have one more question that I want to ask everyone as we close out. And the question is, do you have an opportunity that you want to share with the audience in terms of ways that they can get involved? Just one, right? I mean, if you have more than one, obviously go for it, right? And it could, whether that's at the workplace or at home. Or just in their neighborhood, right? Or just as an individual, right? Curious to, I'll start with Nancy and then make our way over here. Because I've had you go first a few times, so I'll give you a break.
So the first thing, So the first thing I would say is don't call it diversity, equity, inclusion, call it belonging and justice, because that's what we're really after. And diversity and inclusion and equity all matter. But what really matters is that people feel they belong and they feel that they are seen and treated with dignity and have a place of justice to be able to be who they are. So belonging and justice. And then what I would say, the one thing you can do is have a conversation with 5 people about belonging and justice and why it's important to you and why it matters.
Thank you, Nancy.
Before
Did I try?
Oh, it just died.
Oh,
Oh no.
come on. A single point of failure.
Just a second, we're gonna pass you the lapel.
Oh, okay.
We're getting down to the grassroots now.
Resources, thank you. Okay, good innovation. Before I forget, I just wanted to mention, because it came up earlier, I actually am a poll worker, so if anyone has questions about that after, I'm happy to talk to people about that. And that is certainly a way that you can get involved. I think the thing I was going to say though is, and I can't say it the way that we say it in TQNC, I don't think, because I don't think it's appropriate for while being filmed, but we
Look what I did.
Harley has a power, just so you know, Harley has a power to edit, I was told.
All right, well, okay, so the motto that we sort of adopted in what was originally the housing advocacy and became the housing policy advocacy group was just fucking do shit. The thing that I think people get stuck on all the time in terms of engagement is like, it can sort of feel like you have to have a perfect version of it, or you have to have the whole thing planned out. And I think early on we felt like, if we could just get people to do anything at all around engagement, that was a win. And as Jack said earlier, I think just getting people in the room is already a form of engagement that's more valuable than people sometimes realize. So I think like just simple stuff of like, have a group, like if you are a person, like you don't need to be like in leadership at your organization. If you were a person at your organization who's wishing other people came together to have a particular conversation, literally just send a calendar invite and like buy $10 of pastries and the event will exist. Like that is the thing that we have learned, I think, from the last year and a half, is you really don't actually have to do that much organizing to bring the food helps.
Food definitely helps.
Food helps.
I was thinking about the food and then I forgot my thought. No, I want to touch on this idea of allyship again. When we were thinking of including allies, this conversation that Matthew and I had of just more holistically looking at ally in a sense of like Matthew is of course an ally to me as a trans person, outside of straight people being allies to queer people, but just like being allies to one another as human beings, I think is really important. And we're so concerned with like ourselves and how we're being perceived by other people and needing to show up perfectly. We're not going to do that because perfection doesn't exist. None of us are perfect. We're all human. We all make mistakes every single day. You are going to make mistakes in these spaces. You're going to mess up. And that's a beautiful thing because you get a chance to do better next time and take accountability for your mistakes and learn from them. There's no blueprint that I want to follow for my life right now. It has not been designed. I'm creating it as I go. We're creating this new world as we go, all of us. We have to get creative and we have to give each other grace. We have to give ourselves grace and just show up authentically, because when I don't know who you are, I can't connect with you. When you don't know who I am, we're not connecting. We're not getting anything done. And I think the number one thing that has led to the success in the council is our passion and our just engagement with one another. We care about one another. We care about the world.
So something that you can share with folks you work with is that there's Trans Day Remembrance 25th anniversary is coming up. It was founded in Boston, and so it's a big, I'm forgetting the dates, November 15th, 16th, 17th. It'll be a 3-day affair this year, so share it with your staff and invite them to go and encourage them to go. I think the other thing is make space for these conversations to happen. No one needs to work 40 hours a week, but some people do. Linnell does. But make the space during the workday, and don't make folks do it outside of the workday. Create an hour for them to have these opportunities to engage, and I think that they will, one, like work more, and two, you're saying, we realize that this is important to who you are as an individual, and we're making space for it here intentionally. And I think that that's the other way that you can continue to engage with staff and with folks in your company is to do that. Like, let's all do a monthly a lunch together. Let's all do, and you don't have to buy the lunch. You can bring your own lunch. Be like, whatever you need, go find it, and we're gonna sit together. And this happens once a month. And I think that the hard thing about organizing is people don't necessarily want to come together if there's not a problem, right? If there's not a problem, they're like, leave me alone. I want to eat at my desk alone. I want to do this alone. But if you set the expectation that you're coming together regardless of there being a problem, you make space for there to be problems to address, and you make space for there to be joys to share and stories to learn, and that's just a part of the culture that you're establishing. And I think that if you establish a strong culture, maybe, you know, not cult-like or anything, but that you establish a strong organizational culture,
It's an important point. I just want to say that.
but I think that's a big strength that we need to work on for continued employee engagement and buy-in and strength of companies is culture. And I think that's something we always let slide by the wayside when we're overworked, when we're tired, when we're stressed. We don't invest in culture, and that's what burns people out, and that's what sends people away. And so I think that's it.
No, I think you've done a good job there now. But I just really want to say I appreciate all of the different perspectives on this panel today. I think having both the grassroots and the nonprofit and the corporate perspectives are extremely important to have this conversation, right? But I also appreciate the connective tissue across all of you in elevating culture, right? Because culture to me is the body. Right? It's the heart, it's the thing that makes it move, right? And ultimately, it's also why it's important that you are able to have, you know, employees are able to talk to their mid-managers or talk to their HR departments, right? So that you can create those kinds of spaces. So I think a lot of times we also are just waiting for one person to speak up, right? And I think that's not about an avoidance culture, that's more of like, well, let me wait and see culture. And in Massachusetts, that's a very Massachusetts thing. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in other places, because it does, obviously. We're not unique in that way, right? But I do think that the wait and see culture is, you know, it's kind of the thing we like to do. Or sometimes just table talk. Maybe if we talk about it or study it some more, maybe then we'll figure out what the right solution is. And I'm sharing this as to recap some of the themes of what people have shared today, but I think most importantly that there isn't one solution to be able to get more recognition and more equity at times that feel like it's so tough for our community. But I think what's important is that through spaces like this, we learn how much more important it is for us to be in allyship with each other, but most importantly, figuring out, like one of the things I'm already thinking about coming out of here is like, all right, I want to go to one of these queer council meetings because like as someone who lives in Mattapan, and I love living in Mattapan for a lot of different realities, man, it ain't queer in any way, right? Like, I get to be queer as I want to be in many parts, right? But it's fine. I just get to like live that life residentially, right? So just sharing that as a commitment of an action I want to take, not necessarily inviting y'all to an action, right? But again, just want a round of applause for all of our panelists today. Cheryl, can you come back up here again to close this out? That's what I have on my program, I want to make sure. But most importantly, I want to do a round of applause for all of you for coming tonight.
Congratulations, everybody. Thanks so much for coming.